It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the Toronto Varsity Blues head swimming and diving coach, Byron MacDonald. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Brandon. Glad to chat with you.
Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to get involved in college coaching?
Well, that was an interesting question when you mentioned that you wanted to have me answer that, and the reason is that I have a business degree. That's what I went to the University of Michigan. My parents were Canadian, but they moved to the U.S., so I went to school there, and I thought I was going into big business like my dad. Right, he was in the biggest printing company in the United States, but I look back on it, and where did the veer in the road come from? And I look back and I realized that I was coached by 4 or 5 of the leading luminaries in the sport. All right, a guy named Ray Essick, who went on to become the CEO of American Swimming for 20 years. A guy named Frank Keefe in Philadelphia, where I trained in the summers, who was ran the best program in the Eastern Seaboard. I even trained under Don Talbot, the Australian, who moved to Canada for a couple of years. And he was voted, I think, the top coach of the half century in the late, 1950 to 2000. So, a lot of very great coaches. Gus Stager at the University of Michigan was the youngest ever Olympic coach at the time in the 60s and 70s. So, all of a sudden I realized I must have absorbed through osmosis or something their passion and their love of the sport. And I always loved the sport of swimming. I just didn't think it was a profession to go into that I wanted to pursue. And then it just kind of came to me that that's something that, maybe this is something I should look at. And then I fell into a great job right off the bat and never looked back.
What was it like, obviously, getting involved in the Olympics and being a part of the Olympics?
Well, it's the dream of every swimmer is to go to the Olympics, because we don't have a professional, NBA or NHL or anything like that. So, the only way you're going to get the recognition for all the hard work and everything you've done is that if you can get to the actual zenith of the profession, and that's to get to the Olympic Games. So it was overwhelming to swim in front of 15,000 people or whatever, when you're normally swimming in front of 500 people. So it was a pretty big deal. I was at a very special Olympics, the Munich Olympics. Obviously, there were lots of problems with terrorism and everything, but it was a great Olympics, other than obviously the terrorism that happened. A historic Olympics, obviously, with Mark Spitz, who was my class. I swam against him ad nauseum all the time. He was at a rival university and everything. So it was great. It was fantastic. It was everything I'd ever hoped it would be. And, my goal was always to make the finals. I wasn't quite sure I could ever challenge to win a medal, but I made it into the finals and finished 6th, and I was quite pleased about that. So it was a great, great experience.
What was it like as a player to go to the Olympics?
Well, I mean, it was the culmination of all that work. I mean, you're working pretty hard. You're doing lots of things. I did a lot of self-motivating. And what I mean by that is, people laugh now, but when I was in high school, there were no morning workouts. All right? It hadn't been invented yet. And I went to our head coach and I said, I hear in California they're doing morning workouts. Maybe we should do that. And he said, pool's open, bring a friend, don't drown. Right. But he wasn't going to the pool. Right. So I was always self-motivated. So, I think, getting to the Olympic Games was just one more thing that, I wanted to do and accomplish in the sport. So, it was a highlight. It was a tremendous highlight. I mean, I won a few medals internationally at the Commonwealth Games. I won a gold medal. I mean, I would argue that's probably even as big a highlight, winning a gold medal, getting on top of the podium, hearing an anthem. So, that would certainly rank up there with getting into the Olympic final. But the Olympic final was a very, very big deal.
Of course. Were you ever a coach in the Olympics?
Yes. In 1992, I had 3 swimmers top 10 in the world, and one boy went on to win a medal at the Olympic Games in Barcelona. So I was actually named to the staff, but I was named to the staff with an asterisk, Brandon. And what I mean by that is they only had a certain amount of accreditation. So we did a gigantically long training camp. In hindsight, it was a mistake, but anyway, that was a decision made back then. So I think we had an 8-week training camp leading into the Olympic Games. And so I was there for the whole camp, everything. And then once we went over to overseas, but the day the games started, because I do the television commentary. So everybody in the US obviously is very familiar with Rowdy Gaines and the great job he does. Well, I do that for Canada, and I have now for 8 or 9 Olympic Games. So the day the opening ceremonies happened, I had to move up to the booth and off the pool deck and do the commentating. I could still talk to my athletes and I would still meet with them, but I couldn't be on the deck warming them up. You weren't allowed to have an accreditation, both media and sport. So I had to kind of give up my sport accreditation and move up to the booth. So I was on that staff. And then after that, Swim Canada and even the IOC said you can't have both accreditations. So even though I've had athletes on every single Olympic team, I could no longer actually ever even stand to be named to the Olympic staff. So
what was it like? Obviously, as you said, you worked with the media in the Olympics. So what was that experience like for you?
Well, that's very exhilarating. I mean, it's 0 to 100 miles an hour in 2 seconds flat. I mean, you can't make mistakes. It's live. You realize that there are, this is not talking to just you and me, Brendan. This is not talking to just, a few people on an interview for a local newspaper. This is at national championships. This is hundreds of thousands, millions of people that are watching, and it's a great opportunity to sell our sport. And that's what I look at. That's what I look at it as. I do a ton of homework. I'm not, CBC doesn't have the budget that some of the other networks have, so I don't get any researchers that help me. So I basically do it all. And, I spent an hour today writing down stuff because I'm going to be covering the World Championship short course in a few days. So, I've got to make all those notes to be able to, I feel, inform the viewers of what it's like. So very exciting, very exhilarating, very nerve-wracking. You can't rest on your laurels, Brendan, as I'm sure you know with your podcast that, I may have had 2 or 3 great Olympics, and I won an award up here in Canada that's called a Gemini. It's basically like the Emmys in the US for best sports broadcasting for the coverage I did in the 2008 Olympic Games and actually another Olympics before that. But it doesn't matter if you don't pull it off the next games you go to, then you're kind of persona non grata, right? So you got to really be top of your game every single show. So it's something I really, really enjoy doing. I like it.
What's it like, obviously, balancing being a broadcaster and also being a head swimming coach?
Yeah, so that's the question that's asked of me a lot, because if I could be on the Olympic staff, wouldn't I prefer to do that, as swimming coach is my main profession? And I would think twice about it if I didn't have a phenomenal assistant coach. All right, I've got a woman that I've been working with now for 30 years. Linda Kiefer is her name. And because we've had some very elite athletes lately, of course, everybody has heard of Kylie Moss, who's won several medals at the Olympic Games, 3 in the last Olympics and 1 in the Rio Olympics. We were able to convince Swim Canada that Kylie deserved to have a coach. And because we don't split our program into somebody does just.
What was it like balancing, obviously, being a part of the Olympics and obviously coaching college?
The balancing part only happens actually at the games. Other than that, coaching the university team here at the University of Toronto, we have a mandate to do very. Sorry. Okay, sorry. I thought I heard something. I'll start again. The balancing part of coaching international athletes along with the varsity team here at the University of Toronto is such that there's really no conflict until the actual games take place. So in other words, one of the mandates here is to coach at the international level if you possibly can. And so for that reason, we have a varsity program. We coach very well. We try to win the national championships, et cetera, and the conference championships. But then if we have international athletes, then we use that as well. And we try to progress as high as we can with those athletes. So the only conflict comes when you're getting to an international games and you might have other jobs that you might have to do. In my case, I'm doing the television commentary. And I would feel possibly guilty that I'm not on deck with my athletes if I didn't have a good substitute situation. And because I've worked with Linda Kiefer, my assistant coach here for 30 years, and we co-coach. We don't break it into different groups. We co-coach everybody. I felt very confident that I could be up in the booth and that Linda would be on the national staff. And Swim Canada was amenable to having her named to the staff to be able to work with the elite athletes that we've put on international teams. I put somebody on every Olympic team. So the results speak for themselves. Kylie's won, Olympic medal, world records, medals at Worlds, defending world champion, et cetera. So it's worked very, very well. And I think our athletes appreciate that they still got a coach to work with that they're used to working with on a daily basis, and that they can still talk to me. I just can't be with them 24/7. I can talk to them. I certainly talk to Kylie at the Olympics and other places while I'm doing the television, obviously not when the race is on, but prior to that or earlier in the day. So,
Of course, with the University of Toronto, what is a typical swim meet like, and who are some of the teams that you face in your conference?
Well, because I grew up in the U.S. in Chicago in a very competitive high school situation. I went to a school that the people in the Chicago area are very familiar with, New Trier, which has a great legacy of success. And my Canadian parents moved down to Chicago, so that's where I grew up. And so I experienced what a good dual meet is, and an exciting dual meet. And then I went to the University of Michigan, and albeit it was sort of during call it the hippie era or whatever, and there weren't a lot of big crowds or anything like there are now in dual meets, but you still get the feeling for what a good dual meet is. So I tried to institute that here at the University of Toronto and get a good dual meet schedule. And we have a couple teams that we race up here, Western Ontario University, which is in London, McMaster, which is in Hamilton. These are teams that are 1 or 2 hour drive away. And then I try to supplement that with a couple other dual meets. Usually we fly somewhere. We swim University of Nevada, Las Vegas. We swim Columbia and New York City. We actually flew over to England to swim Loughborough University. I think we're the only team in North America that's ever had a dual meet in Europe. So we try to have a dual meet very similar to what dual meets are like in the United States. So it's really not much different. I've even installed spotlights in our pool when they were renovating the pool, so that we've got a spotlight for each lane when we introduce the athletes. That was only done 2 years ago, right before COVID hit. So we actually haven't been able to use it very much yet, but we're going to hope to use it in this season now that we finally are starting to host meets again.
What was it like getting to coach over in England and obviously coach your team over in England?
Well, it was great because they were so excited about having somebody come over from North America. Both women's teams were very, very well balanced, meaning there was a pretty close battle, and that makes dual meets, of course, very, very exciting when the lead goes back and forth. Their men's team, that's their national center in Loughborough, England, so their men's team was pretty loaded. So that wasn't a real close meet, right? So it wasn't quite as exciting, but it happened at the same time. So you were able to feed off each other things. And what happens in dual meets is you make interesting decisions. And we were a little weak in the 400 meter freestyle. And the way the backstrokes played out is we decided to put Kylie Moss in the 400 meter free to see what would happen. And the Loughborough team had a couple of kids going 4:08, and that was way better than our best people. And then Kylie went in there and dropped in a 4:02 short course meters, which is, I don't know how fast that is, 3:30 for 500 yards. I don't know. It's pretty fast, right? So, and all of a sudden we won the event, so we got more points, and it kept the meet really close. It came down to the final relay, which was very exciting, and the Loughborough people absolutely loved it. And we, of course, had it lined up for them to come here the next year, and then COVID hit, and all hell broke loose, obviously, right? So we haven't been able to do any traveling, and they haven't been able to do any. So we're looking to resurrect it, not this year, because again, there's a lot of still rules around travel. My team's actually not allowed to leave the province. We still have very strict protocols up here in Canada, particularly in our province of Ontario. So unlike the US where you're flying all over to do meets, we're not allowed to do that yet. Maybe next semester, certainly next year. So.
Can you talk about, of course, the culture that you have helped build and has built for the Toronto team?
Obviously culture is key. It doesn't matter if you have a lot of talent, if there's really not a feeling of team and going forward and what the goals are. I inherited a team that was good. I didn't have to build from scratch. The first team that I coached in really was a very poor team, actually. And, they were 25th out of 25 teams, I think, in the country. And we were able, in 2 years, I was able to bring them up to third in the country. And that's what sort of then propelled the coaches at the University of Toronto to, bring me on board. And the rule or the guideline that they felt they were employing was that they were able to get to a national level, but they wanted the program to get to the international level. And they felt the current staff couldn't do it. And they wanted me to come in and see if I could do it. I was an unproven commodity, but as it turned out, it turned out okay. We were able to get to that level. So that was the gist of what I was trying to do, is to realize that there's a bigger picture there with everybody here. And, we always say that, we have goal 1A and 1B, and 1A is to do your best time, and 1B is to perform brilliantly at the conference and the national championships and internationally if you can get to that level. So it was not hard to get that culture going, but sometimes the challenge in Canada is that you can be a little bit off your best and you won't fall down a lot of places at the national championships. The NCAAs, if you go a half a second slower in a 100 butterfly, you're probably not even going to make the finals. Whereas here, you go a half a second slower, you might drop one place or two places. So, it's you got to be a little bit more vigilant as a coach to push the athletes and encourage them in the best way you can to push that little extra effort, because they can still succeed if they're not quite 100% ready. So the goal is to get them 100% ready.
Of course, what does the recruitment process look like for prospective student athletes looking to go into swimming?
It's dramatically different than the United States. It's basically like the Ivy League, because we don't have scholarships per se, like the United States does, like most of the NCAA does, other than the Ivy League. So we basically are allowed to give $4,500, which is really not a lot. But there's a small caveat to that, Brendan. Our tuition is only about $8,000 or $9,000. Unlike the ridiculously high tuitions in the United States, it's pretty reasonable here. So we're not going to attract kids from around the world, because foreign tuition is $50,000, but local domestic tuition is pretty cheap. So we don't go out and recruit foreign athletes, because they're not going to come without full scholarships, et cetera. And that's why they'll go to the United States. So I know all the athletes that are in the country. Basically, I know who they are and how fast they swim. It's a smaller pool, obviously, than the United States pool. So therefore, I kind of know who they are and who to talk to. And the beauty I have here at the University of Toronto is annually University of Toronto is ranked the #1 academic school in Canada. And so therefore, good students, which a lot of swimmers are very good students, they're usually gravitating to only one or two universities in the country. And so it minimizes sort of the group that I have to go after. So
What's it like, obviously, seeing your athletes, once they obviously end their college career, go on to the professional, whether it's the Olympics?
Every coach is trying to get their athletes to achieve success, be it a success meaning a personal best time that finishes 27th in the country, or if it's a personal best time that names them to the Olympic team. So, it's a joy at each level. One of the happiest I've probably ever been, and one of my athletes has ever been. And he was by far the slowest athlete on the team, and yet he broke a 1 minute barrier and was absolutely over the moon. He was so happy, and I was so happy for him. So, to get kids on an Olympic team is a real big plus. As I said earlier, I've been able to put somebody on every Olympic team, so it's a real crowning achievement. It's really something, and I feel really happy for the athletes that can make that type of a step in their career and get to an international team. Any international team. Obviously, the Olympics is the epitome, but getting to any international team, and if you ever even get a chance to get on the podium, it's pretty special.
Of course, as the season is going on right now, what are some of your future plans for this upcoming season?
Well, we're very limited. As I said a bit earlier, we can't leave the province for any of our meets. So that kind of curtails sort of some of the special plans that we had. We always do a Christmas training camp. And this year we were going to go to Barbados. But of course, we're not allowed to. We are actually arranging to have some of the other provinces in the country can travel. And so there's a very strong team in Calgary, University of Calgary. And I know the coach very well. So he's actually going to fly out here, and we're going to have a real good dual meet with him. We haven't had one with them, in about 4 or 5, 6 years, I think. And we're very evenly matched. So I think it'll be fantastic. And then we have a conference championships we're hosting. And then the national championships are in the province of Quebec. And then Canada always has their trials for international competitions in April, unlike the United States, usually has them in the summer. So we'll be getting ready for those there the first week of April.
What advice would you give future college players looking to go into swimming?
In other words, somebody who's a high school swimmer, advice meaning how to get to a team or whatever. I mean, the key for any, I would imagine in any sport, but even in the sport of swimming, is that you've got to reach out. Unless you're a superstar, the coaches aren't going to reach out to you. And particularly in Canada, I'm not going to reach out to an athlete until I find out if they actually are deciding not to go to the United States, because of, money talks. And because the United States NCAA programs offer a lot of full scholarships or even significant scholarships, that's a draw for a lot of families. And therefore, I've kind of got to wait to see who's going to take that versus staying at home and realizing they're going to have to pay for most of their education. And again, it's not that much. Tuition's only about $8,000. So it's not a ridiculous amount, but still, if you can get it all paid for, some people want to go south. Some people just want to leave home and get out of town or get out of the local area. And so you just got to, I basically, for an athlete that's looking in Canada on what they want to do, they're going to need to talk to the coaches and let the coaches know that they're interested in sticking around and not going away. And I would argue if they want to go to the United States, a lot of the American coaches won't know they're interested. So they should contact those coaches and talk to them. What's the old adage? Out of sight, out of mind. All right. If they don't know you're interested, then they're not going to pay any attention to you. And unfortunately, with social media and everything, you kind of got to get started in grade 11 now, which is a royal pain, but, puts a lot of pressure on university coaches. So.
What advice would you give future college coaches looking to get into the industry of college coaching?
Well, I could tell you what my university coach told me. He said, don't coach, right? And the reason I think he mentioned that was that sometimes people think that it's a fun, it is. It's a fantastic job. Don't get me wrong. I think it's the best. I think I have the best job on the planet. I love it. But there aren't a lot of jobs that are as good as mine. And there aren't a lot of jobs that are as good as, several of the top jobs in the United States as well. So, you may not necessarily want to pay your dues and start in smaller programs or smaller cities or whatever, in which case then, is it the job that you really want to do? And obviously there's not a giant financial upside except for sort of a handful of coaches. So there are limitations. And particularly if you're getting into club coaching, there's a ton of weekends and a ton of other things that have to be done with your time, early mornings, et cetera. So, it's a challenge. It's a wonderful occupation if you end up in the job that you like and the position that you like. But they're not all perfect situations and working situations. And you're probably going to move around a lot. If you notice, a lot of the coaches in the United States, there's a lot more opportunity in the US. There aren't as many programs here in Canada. They move around a lot. And you're going to have number one rule, you better have a very, very understanding spouse. If you have an understanding spouse that wants to move and can put up with the hours, people phoning you at 10 o'clock at night and recruits calling you at night and you having to deal with issues of your swimmers that need personal assistance at any time of night, 24/7. So, if you've got an understanding spouse, you can go a long way.
That's great advice. Where can my listeners find you at on social media along with the Toronto Varsity Blues swimming program at?
Well, I'm a bit of a dinosaur in that sense. I don't do social media. All right. I don't do the Twitter, Instagram, all that. So we have a website, varsityblues.ca, which is where kind of stuff gets put up. And the athletic department here, of course, fires stuff out on social media. But personally, I'm not involved.
Thank you again, Coach Byron MacDonald, for your interview, and best of luck in your future as the head swimming and diving coach.
No problem. Thank you, Brandon. Talk to you later. Bye.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Coach Byron MacDonald, for your interview, and best of luck in your future.
Okay, talk to you soon.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.